The storm had barely begun when a single father made a choice that defied reason. With his young son watching in terror and his loyal dog by his side, Michael Turner hurled himself into a hail of gunfire to save a police officer he had never met. But what he glimpsed in that chaos, a familiar bracelet gleaming on a gunman's wrist, the same charm his late wife once wore, unraveled everything he thought he knew about her death. Was it fate? Coincidence? Or a buried truth darker than the bullets themselves? This is the story that shook an entire police force. The rain that night did not fall gently. It hammered the streets as if the sky itself were trying to wash away sins too long unspoken. In the small American suburb where life usually ended with quiet dinners and early bedtimes, the storm turned familiar streets into rivers of black glass. Michael Turner gripped the steering wheel of his aging truck, its wipers squealing against the torrents. In the back seat, his 10-year-old son Ethan had dozed off, clutching his worn stuffed bear, the rhythmic patter of rain his uneasy lullaby. Beside Michael, Rex, the family's German shepherd, shifted, ears pricked as if he sensed something in the night that man could not. Michael was tired, as always, tired of double shifts at the auto shop, of unpaid bills stacked on the counter, of the silence that filled his small house where laughter once lived. It had been years since his wife died in that crash, years since the hospital smell of antiseptic and the sight of her silver bracelet had burned themselves into his memory. He had convinced himself that justice was just a word printed in books, never meant for men like him. But as the storm raged on, destiny was already twisting toward him in the form of gunfire. The first crack of a rifle was sharp, louder than thunder. Michael jerked the truck to a stop at the edge of a narrow street, heart pounding as blue and red lights flickered in the rain. At first, he thought it was another late-night stop. Some reckless driver pulled over. But the scream of tires, the shouted curses, and the rapid bursts of automatic fire told him otherwise. He squinted through the streaked windshield and saw a young police officer pressed against the wall of a convenience store, his gun shaking in his hand. Two masked men advanced, rifles gleaming under the street lamp, their boots splashing through puddles with grim certainty. Michael felt Ethan stir in the back seat. "Dad?" the boy whispered, his voice small and trembling. "What's happening?" Michael looked into the rearview mirror and saw the fear in his son's eyes. It was the same fear he had seen the night his wife died, when Ethan clutched his shirt in that sterile hospital hallway. His chest tightened. He swore he would never let his boy live through that helplessness again. Rex growled, low and urgent. The sound vibrated through the cab of the truck, pulling Michael into the present. His gaze locked on the officer, then shifted to the attackers closing in. For 1 second, he considered driving away, telling himself it wasn't his fight. But then the past slammed into him like a wave. The hospital lights, the bracelet on his wife's wrist, the officer who arrived too late. And now, his breath caught, because under the flickering light, he saw one of the gunmen raise his arm to adjust his rifle. Rain slid down his sleeve, and there, on his wrist, gleamed a braided bracelet with a small, broken star charm. Michael's mind reeled. It couldn't be. That bracelet had been buried with his wife. Yet here it was, flashing at him like a ghost's accusation. His decision came in a heartbeat. He flung open the door, the storm drenching him instantly. "Stay here, Ethan," he commanded, his voice firmer than he felt. Ethan's cry caught in his throat, but the boy obeyed, clutching his bear like a shield. Rex leapt from the truck, muscles coiled, barking fiercely. Michael's boots splashed into the flood of rainwater as he sprinted toward danger. The gunman turned, startled by his shout. Bullets tore through the night, sparks dancing as they struck the pavement. Michael dove, grabbing a length of rusted pipe from the gutter. He swung with the desperation of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything left to protect. The pipe slammed into the first rifle, the metallic clang echoing. Rex lunged, teeth sinking into the arm of the second man, the gun tumbling from his grasp. The young officer seized his chance, firing back, his shots finding their mark. One assailant crumpled into the water, the other fell clutching his shoulder, cursing. Michael's chest heaved, his knuckles white around the pipe, rain and sweat dripping into his eyes. For a long second, silence returned, broken only by the storm and Rex's growl. The officer stared at Michael with disbelief and gratitude, as if he could not understand why a stranger had risked everything for him. In the truck, Ethan pressed his face against the glass, tears mixing with fog as he watched his father stand tall in the rain. But Michael's eyes were not on the officer. They were on the ground where the injured gunman writhed, his wrist still visible, the bracelet, the broken star charm. A piece of his past had risen from the grave, and with it came a truth that threatened to shatter the fragile life he had built. He felt the old rage stirring, the guilt, the ache of all he had lost. Tonight was not just about saving a man. Tonight was the beginning of unraveling everything he thought he knew about justice, loyalty, and the darkness within the very system sworn to protect. The hospital corridor smelled of bleach and stale coffee, its fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above Michael's head as he was wheeled into a room. Rain still lashed against the windows, as if the storm refused to let the night end. Ethan clutched his stuffed bear tightly, his wide eyes fixed on his father, while Rex limped faithfully at the boy's side, a fresh bandage wrapping his flank where a bullet had grazed him. For Michael, the sterile white walls closed in like a prison cell. He had been here before, years ago, waiting for a miracle that never came. The beeping of distant monitors sent him spiraling back to the night his wife died, her silver bracelet slipping coldly from her wrist as life drained away. That bracelet, or its twin, had flashed in the rain tonight, tied to the wrist of a man who tried to kill him. It was no coincidence. It was a message from the past, clawing its way back. Hours later, the door creaked open and Officer Davis stepped in. He looked younger without the helmet and bulletproof vest, but his face was haunted, jaw tight, eyes ringed with guilt. A strip of gauze wrapped his temple, his uniform smudged with dirt and blood. He lingered in the doorway, like a man uncertain if he had the right to be there. "You didn't have to do what you did," Davis said finally, voice raw. "But you did. You and your dog saved me." Michael studied him in silence, his grip tightening on the bedrail. Something about the young man unsettled him, a shadow of familiarity that twisted his gut. That unease only grew when Linda Harrow entered the room later that night. She was older than Davis, seasoned in battlefields that didn't use bullets, but could destroy lives all the same. Her auburn hair, streaked with gray, was pulled back tightly, and her eyes carried a weight that was both personal and professional. She placed a manila folder on the bedside table with quiet finality. "Michael," she said, her voice steady. "This wasn't a random ambush. Evidence suggests someone in the department tipped off those shooters. There are threads tying tonight to older cases, including one you know too well." Her gaze flicked briefly toward Ethan, then back to Michael. The room seemed to shrink, her words slicing through the hum of the air vent. Michael's throat tightened. The storm outside blurred into memory, his wife's blood on his hands, the unanswered calls for help, the officer who had arrived too late with excuses in his eyes. He felt the rage he had buried for years rising like bile. "You're saying her death wasn't an accident?" he whispered, the words tasting of ash. Linda didn't flinch. "I'm saying it may not have been just negligence, and if we push this, we'll be up against men who'd rather bury you than face exposure." That night, Michael could not sleep. Ethan had curled into the chair beside his bed, the bear pressed against his chest. Rex lay at the foot of the bed, twitching in restless dreams. Every time Michael closed his eyes, he saw the bracelet gleaming in the rain. His mind replayed the way the gunman's wrist twisted under the light, how it mirrored the charm that had been lowered into the ground with his wife. Grief mixed with fury, a storm louder than the one rattling the hospital windows. In the early hours, a man in plain clothes appeared in the hallway, pretending to check the vending machine. Rex's ears shot up, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The man slipped into the room, his steps too careful. Before Michael could speak, Rex lunged, teeth ripping into the man's coat sleeve. Papers spilled onto the linoleum floor, scattering like leaves in the wind. Michael grabbed one with trembling hands. The pages bore police headers, red stamps of confidential. One sheet listed patrol schedules, another outlined Davis's assignment history. The man yanked free and fled down the hall before security arrived, leaving the incriminating documents behind. When Davis returned the next morning, his face was pale. He saw the papers on the table, his shoulders slumping, as though the weight of years had finally crushed him. He sat beside Michael's bed, his hands shaking. "I should have told you long ago," he murmured. "The night your wife died, I was a rookie. I hesitated. I froze when I got the call. By the time I acted, it was too late. They reassigned the case and buried my failure. I've lived with it every day." His eyes flicked to Ethan, who stood silently by the bed, listening. "But tonight wasn't just about me freezing. The bracelet you saw, the men who attacked us, they're tied to the same network that covered up what happened back then." Michael's body trembled with rage. For years he had blamed himself, cursed faceless officials. But here sat a man of flesh and blood admitting the truth. The urge to lash out burned in his chest. But then Ethan's small hand slipped into his. His son's grip was firm, grounding him. Violence would not bring his wife back. Only truth could. Michael met Davis's broken gaze, his voice rough but steady. "Then you help me. You help me finish this. Not for me, for her, for him." He nodded toward Ethan. Linda, who had been silent until then, leaned forward. "If you're both serious, you'll need to be ready. This won't end in back alleys. It will end in court. And in court, you'll be their greatest threat." Her eyes softened for a heartbeat, the flicker of a personal bond surfacing. She had known Michael's wife once, shared her laughter, mourned her loss. Now she too was carrying that memory into battle. The storm outside began to break, dawn's light pressing faintly at the edge of the horizon. But inside Michael, a darker storm was only beginning. The fight ahead would not just be for justice. It would be for redemption, truth, and the fragile hope that healing could come even after years of silence. The courthouse loomed against a sky still gray from the night's storm, its marble steps slick with rain. Michael walked slowly up those steps, Ethan holding his hand, Rex limping faithfully at his side with his bandage. The world outside saw a man who had rushed into gunfire, but Michael carried something heavier inside him. The ghosts of his wife, the scars of silence, and the fragile hope that justice might finally break through. Linda met them at the entrance, her tailored suit unable to hide the exhaustion in her eyes. She had been receiving threats for days. Anonymous notes slipped under her door, voicemails promising ruin. Yet she stood firm, her folder of evidence clutched like a shield. "Stay close," she whispered. "They will try to bury us. Don't let them." Inside, the courtroom was charged with tension, every seat filled, reporters scribbling, cameras flashing. At the defense table sat Captain Horace Miller, the decorated officer whose medals had once made him untouchable. He looked polished and composed, but when Michael's gaze dropped to the faint scar on his wrist, his stomach clenched. That scar marked the same arm that bore the bracelet on the night of the ambush. Miller's cold eyes met his, and Michael knew the truth. This was the man who had silenced the cries of his past. The proceedings began with Davis on the stand. His uniform had been replaced with a plain suit, but he seemed smaller, weighed down by shame. His voice shook as he confessed, admitting the delay that cost Michael's wife her life. The orders he obeyed to bury the truth, the guilt that had eaten at him every day since. At one point, his eyes met Ethan's in the gallery, and his voice broke. "I can't give him his mother back," he said, "but I can give him the truth." The jury listened in silence, the gallery buzzing with shock. Davis's career was gone, his reputation destroyed. But in that moment, He looked lighter, as if confessing had freed him from years of chains. Then Michael took the stand. The wood of the railing was smooth beneath his palm, the courtroom lights too bright. He spoke not like a witness, but like a man opening his heart to the world. He told them of his wife, the scent of bread she baked on Sundays, the laughter that used to echo in their tiny kitchen, the way her bracelet caught the sun when she reached for him. He told them of that night, the crash, the unanswered calls, the silence that swallowed him whole. And then he told them about the storm, the gunfire, the bracelet glinting again on a stranger's wrist, proof that the past had not died, but had been twisted into something darker. His words filled the room with the weight of grief and resilience. Linda laid out the documents, the memos Rex had uncovered, the threads connecting Miller to the ambush and to a network of officers who had fed criminals information for years. Each page was another nail in the coffin of Miller's spotless reputation. At last, she turned to him, her voice sharp. "Captain Miller, do you deny your hand in covering up the crash that killed Michael Turner's wife? Do you deny supplying these men with information that cost lives?" Miller's mask cracked, a sneer twisted his lips, and his voice dripped with contempt. "You think justice is clean? I did what was necessary. Collateral damage. His wife, others like her, was the price to protect the department's image." Gasps filled the courtroom. Ethan's small hand gripped Michael's tightly, tears streaming down his cheeks. Michael's own rage burned like fire, but Rex barked, sharp and grounding, pulling him back from the edge. The jury deliberated for hours, but when they returned, the verdict was clear. Guilty on all counts. Miller's face hardened as he was led away in cuffs, but his power was gone, stripped by the truth he could no longer bury. Linda exhaled slowly, shoulders sagging with relief and fatigue, knowing she had won the case but at the cost of her own safety and perhaps her career. Davis stood outside the courthouse steps, his uniform gone, his future uncertain. But when Ethan walked up and hugged him tightly, whispering, "Thank you," the broken man wept openly. Michael knelt beside Rex, stroking the dog's fur. "You saved us, old friend," he whispered, the dog's tail thumping weakly. Ethan reached into his backpack and pulled out a single white flower. He placed it gently on the courthouse steps. "For Mom," he said, his voice steady despite the tears. The flower glistened in the thin sunlight breaking through the clouds, fragile yet unyielding, a symbol of love, justice, and the strength to endure. Michael looked at his son, at the dog, at the flower, and felt the weight in his chest shift. The storm of the past would never fully leave. The scars would remain. But healing had begun. Justice had not come easily, nor without sacrifice. It had been dragged into the light by those willing to stand, to speak, to fight. As he took Ethan's hand, he realized they were not walking away from the courthouse broken. They were walking forward into a future shaped not by silence, but by truth. In the end, Michael's journey was not only about confronting corruption, but about reclaiming hope for himself, for his son, and for everyone who has ever felt powerless against injustice. What began with a storm and a single act of courage became proof that ordinary people, driven by love and truth, can bring down even the darkest forces. The white flower on the courthouse steps was more than a tribute. It was a promise that healing is possible, even after years of silence and pain. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe, share your own story of resilience, and help keep these messages of hope and justice alive.